So, baby, what you doing? What you doing? Oh no, I have it the wrong way. Fuck. Wrecked. Cat, where are you? Can I flip the camera? Oh. What you doing? Am I angry or what? I'm not angry. What's up, little baby? What you doing? What you doing? Hi. Good boy. Hey. What you doing? I don't think I took it away. I never took it away. I just talked shit to you, dude. I didn't fucking ban you or anything. Cause Channel Q was being crazy or whatever. I don't remember. His name is Dorian because he's gray and he's named after Dorian Gray. This book is very eye-opening. I've learned, like, the system makes way more sense now that I understand some of this book. Most of it probably went over my head. It's a hard read. And I'm not like, I ain't no academic. Sumu jus summa injuria. Why has he got this next subchapter's got a Latin title? I don't speak Latin. What does it mean? I don't know. Really. U2 is like the head Illuminati band. They promote like all the bullshit like climate change. They probably promote Black Lives Matter and shit. What the fuck are you doing? What are you thinking? You get scared. He's scared of. He was isolated with me, so he's not used to being around people. Loud noises freak him out. Why are you you're destroying things? What's wrong with you? I'm gonna take you back to the shelter. What are you doing? Let's go. I want to read my book. I want to read my book. What are you doing? That's his kennel when he's naughty. I broke that lamp. There's my pull-up bar in my bed. Place is kind of messy. It's not too bad. Stay where I can see you. Yeah. Good boy. Summa jus, summa injuria. The function of justice provokes an unending major debate between the claims of justice and those of judicial technique. Judicial technique is in every way much less self-confident than the other techniques, because it is impossible to transform the notion of justice into technical elements. Despite what philosophers may say, justice is not a thing which can be grasped or fixed. If one pursues genuine justice, and not some automatism or egalitarianism, one never knows where one will end. A law created as a function of justice has something unpredictable in it which embarrasses the jurist. Moreover, justice is not in the service of the state. It even claims the right to judge the state. Law created as a function of justice eludes the state, which can neither create nor modify it. The state, of course, sanctions this situation only to the degree that it has little power or has not yet become fully self-conscious, or to the degree that its jurists are not exclusively technical rationalists and subordinated to efficient results. Under these conditions, technique assumes the role of a handmaiden modestly resigned to the fact that she does not automatically get what she desires. A certain equilibrium is established between the pursuit of justice and the judicial technique, which flourishes in a period of natural law. Judicial technique has a place, but in many respects it is not easily defined. So, technique, he's talking about basically, technique is sort of synonymous with science. Technique is the totality of methods rationally arrived at and having absolute efficiency in every state of human affairs. So, it's just like the science of politics. So, it's like, the most rational, effective political methods to whatever reach your political goals. Or for sports, technique would be like the best way to play the game, the most efficient, rational method. Like like in basketball, they used to say don't shoot three point shots, but then because of technique and when they analyzed the data, they realized that shooting 3 point shot was good. So technique, efficiency changed the way they played basketball. And so this idea of applying rational methods to come up with the best way of doing whatever, like play basketball, sewing, anything, running a race, designing a car. It's all about rational methods to achieve the most efficient results. That is technique. It's kind of like science. Uh, there are indeed very different definitions of the role of judicial technique. For Salil, judicial technique constitutes the arrangement of judicial concepts, the reduction of rules to a coherent system. This limits it to a highly theoretical notion, essentially an intellectual operation. The same holds for Savigny's contention that judicial technique is concerned with the scientific elaboration of law by jurists, as opposed to the spontaneous creation of law by the people. This is doubtless not inexact, but Savigny is referring rather to the consequences of judicial technique. It is true that when judicial technique develops, the spontaneous creation of law declines and dies, that the popular source of law is sterilized by learned law, and that this gives the jurist a free hand. But then, Savigny is describing an aspect of judicial technique, not the not the purpose of judicial technique. We come much closer to actuality with Kohler, who assigns to judicial technique the role of adapting legal texts to practice. And it is Kohler's concept which has guided the major authors who have studied the problem of judicial technique, albeit with individual differences. Guény, Davin, Hezerat, Perot, probably. It's probably some French motherfucker. In this context, judicial technique consists in setting reality in a framework of means through legal decisions and in rendering these decisions effective. It can then be reasonably argued that political function and judicial technique are complementary. Political function consists in supplying the substance of the rules, that is, the goal to be attained, the political or social ideal which the law is to realize. But its laws, the state, will also indicate ways and means of reaching the political goal, and in so doing will approach reality to a sufficient degree, without, however, grappling with it directly. It is the task of the jurist to give form to the instructions and decisions of the law, not only by rendering them systematic, but by implementing them. Legal form is clearly not a mere verbal, external matter, but a means of effecting something. It has a broader scope than Perot suggests when he defines legal technique as an operational procedure meant to secure the goal sought by the will by causing the will to enter onto the legal plane. But this exclusive relation between technique and will which leaves out the whole judicial expression of social and economic reality, is far too restricted. Judicial technique is not merely a technique of adaptation, but one of creation of law in its entirety. The great task of judicial technique, then, is to arrange the elements furnished it by the political function in order that the law not be merely a verbalism, a dead letter. And this takes a whole arsenal of proofs, civil and penal sanctions, guarantees, in short, the whole detailed mechanism created to secure the realization of the ends of the law. Hasserat seems to me to have defined this judicial technique excellently as the ensemble of means by which the subjects of law are induced to take, in the social system in which they exist, the legal attitude. The active or passive behavior judged necessarily, or necessary. The active or passive behavior judged necessary. It is really, therefore, a question of obedience, and this is in fact the end toward which judicial technique aims. For the technician of law, all law depends on efficiency. There is no law but in its application. A law which is not applied is not a law. Obedience to rule is the fundamental condition of its being. Legal abstraction is unreal. The whole technical apparatus, expression of legal norms, publication of laws, applications in jurisprudence or doctrine, voluntary or forced realization, has but one end: the application of the law. And this complex corresponds exactly to the notion of technique in general, that is, an artificial search for efficiency. In this definition, efficiency is taken excuse me. Show chat. In this definition, efficiency is taken in its pure state. We are forced to admit that law does not exist without it. Hey, you little... Don't do that! The term artificial is used in the same way. Law is no longer obeyed spontaneously, and the popular consciousness which originally created law does not adhere spontaneously and naturally to the system. Application of law no longer arises from popular adhesion to it, but from the complex of mechanisms which, by means of artifice and reason, adjust behavior to rule. This technical creation of law is, then, requisite and gains its scope through two operations. 1. By means of the first judicial element, by means of the first, the judicial element is separated. What is it by means of the first? I don't understand. By means of the first, the judicial element is separated from the law as such. The judicial element, which becomes principally organization, is no longer charged with pursuing justice or creating law in any way whatsoever. It is charged with applying the laws. This role can be perfectly mechanical. It does not call for a philosopher or a man with a sense of justice. What is needed is a good technician who understands the principles of the technique, the rules of interpretation, the legal terminology, and the ways deducing consequences and finding solutions. What are you doing? Oh. The removal of law from the concrete is a great step forward in the process of technicization. The judicial element is charged with certain practical questions, but, as we have said, not with making law. It is in position to become technical in detail because the problem of justice is no longer one of its concerns. It does not have to be judge of the rules which it is commissioned to apply. The disassociated judicial element gains more efficiency to the degree that it is made completely technical. It becomes possible to divorce judicial reasoning from a dangerous empiricism by confining the infinite diversity of judicial situations to a limited number of conceptual frameworks. Fundamental legal institutions thereby derive simplicity and vigor because they are more directly based in the techniques which give them their logical foundation. This logical foundation is doubtless compensated by a certain sclerosis of the legal framework and by a certain stiffness of judicial will. If, moreover, because of the invasion of techniques, the judicial factor exists apart from concrete problems, it comes under state control. There is, in addition, another problem, the perpetual problem of justice. Justice is no longer conceived of as a practical requirement vis-a-vis individual problems, but rather as a mere idea, an abstract notion. Then it becomes simple to discard it entirely. Even so, men of law have certain scruples and are unable to eliminate justice from the law completely without twinges of conscience. But it is not possible to retain it because of the difficulties it involves, the uncertainty of operation and unpredictability it entails. In a word, judicial technique implies that bureaucracy cannot be burdened any longer with justice. But, in that case, how shall another and newer meaning be given to the law? It is a remarkable fact that all societies which have arrived at a certain degree of state control in legal evolution have found the same answer to this question. In Egypt, in Rome, in the 4th century after Christ, in 15th century France, and in all of 20th century Western civilization, the concept of order and security is substituted for justice as the end and foundation of law when judicial technique becomes sufficiently developed. I gotta make sure. My cat has pica. I gotta make sure he doesn't fucking eat plastic or some shit. What are you doing? Why don't you come? What? You didn't eat anything, did you? Why don't you come home? Hey. What? Come home. What are you doing? Are you eating things on the ground? What is there? There's nothing even there. What are you doing, dude? What's wrong with you? Come on, let's go home. Come on. Come on. Let's go. Let's go. Come on. What are you doing? Come on, let's go. Come on. What are you doing, man? Good boy. Good boy. Let's go. Let's go. Come on. Come on. Good boy. Good boy. There. You had your adventure. You got your adventure. Yo. Okay. But in that case, oh wait, I read that. The formula then becomes better injustice than disorder. The notions of order and security are at least as easily reduced to technique as is the impossible notion of justice. One knows exactly what measures must be taken to achieve order. The definition of order may vary, but the means are always the same. One knows and is in a position to specify the conditions of legal security. Even though these means imply injustice, it is impossible to object in view of the changeable character of the concept of justice. The more explicit judicial technique becomes, the more the law tends to ensure order. This is, moreover, one of the major objectives of the state. Therefore, the law and the police become identical, for the law is no longer anything but an instrument of the state. At such a price, judicial technique blossoms and yields its consequences. Today we are in a position to study this phenomenon in all its vigor. At most, a possible inconsistency in the laws, to which the need for order constrains the state, might trouble the conscience of jurists. But since there is no longer any foundation of law and justice, legal inconsistency cannot have any very far-reaching effects or endanger the judicial technique. The schematism I have described is found. The schematicism I have described is found over and over again behind the complexity of modern legal phenomena. Under such conditions, what are you doing? Under such conditions, the traditional equilibrium between the technical and human elements is quickly lost. In affirming that there is no law without efficiency, we in fact announce the implicit sacrifice of justice and the human being to efficiency. With this lack of equilibrium, the door is wide open to further technical invasion. We are witnessing the result, the takeover of law by technique, among nations which have a less firmly rooted legal sense than the French. Until now, I have been speaking of judicial technique still as a recognizable part of the world of law. The jurist, although turned technician, adhered to a general line which prevented technique from reaching a pure state. But once the pure technical mentality, technique in itself, has penetrated the legal world, legal technique, which no longer has its roots in law but in the physical sciences or perhaps even in biology, brings about certain decisive upheavals in social life. The technician rejects both the school of natural law and the historical school, so that, according to F. Younger, the law becomes merely a complex of technical norms. The demands of conscience, as well as those of society, to use the traditional language, become subordinated to normative technique. It is no longer considered necessary to secure popular adherence to law or to be limited to legal means in order to secure the application of law. The enormous simplicity of technique has deprived the whole ensemble of judicial mechanisms of meaning. Mechanisms which had as their end to guarantee the law and to cause it to be obeyed without excessive use of force. The whole apparatus of devices such as penalties, distraints, and the like no longer makes sense. There is no need of such finesse. Adherence and obedience are secured by extra legal means, among which the police are very often the most innocuous. Oh shit. There's a lot to read here. Okay. Alright, it's got a little bit left to read. Okay. We are today in the process of transcending the traditional position. That is to say, law ensures order instead of justice. Hans Kelsen represents the culmination of this new development. And it was expressed in a certain... God, I can't read. Hans Kelsen represents the culmination of this development, and it was expressed in certain of the legal forms of Nazism. The Nazis recognized that a science of human behavior would make it possible to dispense with many legal rules. If the people to be administered were persuaded, if they were made to understand by sufficiently powerful means that the observation of the rule was in their own interest, that rule would become more and more useless. If a sufficiently functional, realistic, and coherent pattern is established for the organized human milieu, and the technique of organization can furnish such a plan in short order, a great part of the administrative apparatus is rendered superfluous. In this way, society is directed toward a progressive emptying of legal forms and a consequent gain in the human techniques which render a gender army useless. Gender armory. A further consequence of the technicization of the law is that the distinction between political technique and judicial technique disappears, for all practical purposes. The subject and object of the law are no longer social, but rather technical exigencies, exigencies. The technician approves a proceeding in this way. The very matter of law becomes his object. He has good reason to desire such a situation. He is no longer burdened with absurd methods of procedure. His judgments become completely rational, since he understands the social necessities and the economic situation and can take them into account in his calculations. But it should not be thought that the technician merely translates these necessities into law. Above all, he elaborates them, and they are essentially subordinate to him and his technique. This explains the enormous proliferation of laws. The technician analyzes and predicts. He cannot endure the intermediate or tolerate any initiative which upsets order. These two traits explain the multiplicity of laws. In the past, this multiplicity was attributed to inefficiency, the repeated promulgation of a law, or the indefinite multiplication of laws accentuated the fact that laws were going unobserved. Legal multiplicity today is something else again. Whatever a technician believes is true must be made into law, but his inferences only concerning details. His analytic spirit leads him to perceive, understand, and affirm strictly localized truths, and thus strictly delimited them. What? His analytic spirit leads him to perceive, understand, and affirm strictly localized truths, and thus strictly delimited. They then become the objects of law. There must be a law for each fact, whence the indefinite proliferation of the legal apparatus. The modern proliferation of laws can also be explained by the legal technician's complete antipathy to the notion of a doctrinal law, to a jurisprudence of concepts. A legal system which merely establishes principles and lays down general lines of procedure entrusts to the judge the creation of the living law under the maxim praetor viva vox juris civilis. Such a state of affairs is intolerable to the technician, who dreads above all else the arbitrary, the personal, and the fortuitous. The technician is the great enemy of chance. He finds the personal element insupportable. For that reason, he finds it advisable to enclose the judge or the administrator in a tighter and tighter technical network, more and more hedged about with legal prescriptions, in such a way that the citizen will understand exactly where he is heading and just what consequences are to be expected. Law, then, must provide for every contingency so that man cannot disturb its operation. The traditional development of law involved a kind of competition between judges and crooks, but with the progress of technique, this is no longer the case. Society, through the application of extra legal means, is beginning to guarantee public obedience to the law. Its real problem now is to restrain the activities of those who would apply the law only to distort it, from the judge down to the lowest prison guard. The smallest detail must therefore be invested with the majesty of the law. After all, law concerns an organized society. The law of persons, for example, is now the law of persons technically organized. Even property law has been profoundly modified by the disturbances to which technique has subjected property ownership. We see once more that all the fundamental technical data verify and reinforce one another. As to the consequences, I believe they may be reduced to two. Law becomes a mere instrument of the state, and, in the end, law disappears. The first of these statements is in no way connected with a general theory of law. I am not saying that the essence of law is reduced to the will of the state. I confine myself to the observation of facts. When the law becomes technical, it must be formulated on the basis of technical methods. It is necessary to propound an edict from some center, exactly as in the Latin e dicere. Technical law implies a close relation with the state, and the more technical the law becomes, the more this relation becomes exclusive of all but technical content. The movement is reinforced by the fact that the state simultaneously becomes technical too. This concordant development results in an actual identification, apart from any doctrinal proposition, of the expression of the law with some purely administrative proceeding. It is always possible, of course, to affirm the supremacy of aspects of the law other than its actual expression. They are completely detached from reality, being separated from it by a formidable arsenal of strictly administrative texts and the specific turn of the technical mentality. The law at present is an affair of the state. The state, whenever it expresses itself, makes a law. There are no longer any norms to regulate the activity of the state. It has eliminated the moral rules that judged it and absorbed the legal rules that guided it. The state is a law unto itself, and recognizes no rules but its own will. When, in this way, technique breaks off the indispensable dialogue between the law and the state, it makes the state a god in the most theologically accurate sense of the term, a power which obeys nothing but its own will and submits to no judgment from without. This godlike will of the state is for modern man the most precise expression of technique. In the second place, we are witnessing the disappearance of the law and the legal proliferation described. This dissolution is notable in two things: the loss by the law of its end and of its domain. In connection with the first point, law, whether we like it or not, is dependent on justice. This is no arbitrary affirmation. Further, I do not have in mind a justice which is subject to all manner of intellectual tortures. When law is detached from justice, it becomes a compass without a needle. The substitution of order for justice, useful though this may be for the purpose of making law technical, itself quickly becomes a contributory factor in the disassociation. For what does order signify? In effect, the same thing as efficiency. Law must assure order. Order is the application of the will of the state. Law must be efficient. Efficiency is itself order. Once more, we witness a general transformation of means into ends. Law thus becomes an activity without an end and without any meaning. It is efficient for efficiency's sake, and individual laws are conceived solely with a view to being efficient. The whole functional theory of law is in accord with this. The idea that every man has a function in society, that law exists to give him the means of fulfilling this function, and to see to it that he does fulfill it, represents justice in abstracto. The idea is not new. It dominated the whole of medieval law. What is new and is in process of completely changing the meaning of the idea of function is the relation between function and technique. Law no longer possesses, or no law no longer poses the problem of the finality of man's functions. Law no longer coordinates man's functions in their relation to justice. As soon as that function is keyed to technique, it becomes valid in and of itself. Everyone's function, once has become technical, finds in technique its meaning and validity. Its proper results and destiny are little importance. The law has become a mere organizer of individual functions. It thus constitutes only a part of the larger science of social relations and connections. This development is clearly taking place today in property law, contract law, and so on. Similarly, it is contributing to the dissolution of the law. Traditionally, there was a specific domain of law which could easily be defined, for example, by comparing different legal systems present and past. Legal domain always remained the same. Today, however, the frontiers have expanded. It is no longer possible to distinguish between what is law and what is not. Every application of technique to the social sphere becomes part of the domain of law. A clear example of this is the problem of planning, the true legal domain. Today is that of planning. Everything affected by planning must be transformed into law. The domain of law is therefore no longer defined by object or by end, but by method. This transition represents a triumph of technique. No longer is the preoccupation of the law and justice its measure. The law's concern is to apply new means to all accessible areas. The very being of the law is thus dissolved. In itself, the law has come to represent nothing but a terminology and a travesty on tradition which happens to be useful to the new lords and masters. People who today hold the law in contempt are at least not deceived by false impressions. Nevertheless, in consenting to be robbed in this way, man renounces one of his highest vocations. Ain't that a bitch?